Chapter 13. The plan had been for Billy Van Arsdale and Francesca Corleone to fly from Florida to New York along with Francesca's brothers, her mother, and her mother's perpetual fiancé, Stan the liquor man. But Billy's parents gave him his Christmas present early, a two-tone Thunderbird, waiting for him the day he came home from school in his yellow Joe College jalopy, an old jeepster that Billy loved partially because it mortified his parents, but that, in truth, had done well to make it back to Palm Beach from Tallahassee. The chance to hit the road for a long trip in a car like that Thunderbird, he told Francesca on the phone, was too much to pass up. She thought she knew what he was also saying, but she said nothing about it, and neither did he. The plane tickets had been bought, but Billy's parents, who were going to skiing in Austria, called their travel agent and had him take care of the refunds. The night before the trip, Billy drove down to Hollywood. He'd been there once before, at Thanksgiving, a month after he and Francesca had started dating, and seemed to have a good impression on everyone but Kathy, who was cold to him the whole time, and then wrote Francesca the next week to say she was disappointed that Francesca's self-hatred ran so deep. Francesca's translation: Kathy was so jealous she could die. Without Kathy around, though, everyone else in the family apparently took it on themselves to make Billy uncomfortable. Before he even had a chance to give Francesca a hug, Papa Francavilla had dragooned him to the next door and helped him put in a new toilet. In the middle of that, Nana came in carrying a plate of sliced oranges she'd grown herself on one side and ones that had come from his family's company on the other, asking him to taste and to see if he could tell which was which. They all went to dinner at a tacky steak joint just because Frankie's football coach's son owned it. Frankie asked Billy why he'd been a swimmer instead of a football player. Had he been cut from the football team? Francesca was about to kick her brother under the table, but Billy said that was exactly what had happened and told a funny story about it. She spilled his Coke on Billy. Twice. Is it really possible for a 10-year-old to spill his drink twice? On the same person? Accidentally? Everyone but Francesca seemed to think so. Sandra supervised Billy's loading of the Christmas presents into the trunk and back seat of his car, the hauling of the same being a key to getting Sandra to go along with this trip, then escorted Billy and Francesca next door to her parents' house, where Billy was being exiled as a deterrent to intimacy. It was only 9:30, but they had a long day tomorrow. The only reason Billy was spending the night, he only lived an hour away, was so that they could leave at dawn and abide by their pledge to drive all day and night, 24 hours straight through to New York without stopping at any hotel. And if you do have to stop, Sandra said now, yet again, for some God forbid act of God, you'll what? Get separate rooms, Ma, Francesca intoned. Call to let you know we're okay. Call when? Immediately, Ma. Come on, stop it. And all the receipts for those separate rooms? We'll show them to you to prove it. As if that would prove anything. Ma, this is crazy. Sandra made Billy repeat the same litany. He complied. Sandra nodded and said that was good. She trusted them, and she hated to think what would happen if they ever betrayed that. I know you want to enjoy a nice kiss goodnight, she said. So I'll leave you alone now, eh? Hypocrite, Francesca thought. When her mother was her age, she was already pregnant. I love you, Billy whispered, leaning slowly toward her, and she whispered it back, her lips still moving with the words when he kissed her. As if so triggered, the porch light went on. I love your family, Billy said. You're nuts. You'd wish they'd get off your back, but everyone who doesn't have what you have wishes they had it. It was not the first time she was afraid Billy was with her only because she was different, exotic, the Italian girl, a means of shocking his parents, but less extreme than going out with a Negro or an Indian, like her roommate Susie. but it was the first time she summoned the courage to say something about it. You sure you don't just love me for my family? He shook his head and looked away. Immediately she wished she hadn't said it. He must have said or thought this about every girl he had ever dated, including Francesca herself. As she started to apologize, he leaned toward her and kissed her again, touching her with nothing but his warm lips, and held it. When she opened her eyes, his were already open. Before noon the next day, they had registered as man and wife at a small beachfront hotel north of Jacksonville. Francesca was afraid the desk clerk would object. Neither of them wore a wedding ring, but Billy tipped the clerk as he registered. You'd be surprised, he said as they walked toward their room, how much discretion you can buy for $20. Now Francesca stood in the bathroom and took out the pale green negligee that, knowing her mother would go through her luggage, she'd rolled up and hidden in her purse. Okay, she thought. Here goes. She watched herself undress, as if it were someone else, there in the mirror. A girl, a woman, in the last moments of her virginity, unbuttoning, unfastening, pulling off, stepping out, folding each piece of clothing, placing it gingerly on the marble countertop, as if she is afraid it will explode, patting her stomach, rubbing her hands over the small dents in her flesh where her fat bra strap had been, trying to make them go away, twisting around, craning her neck to see what she must look like from behind. She touches her hair, and it doesn't move. She brushes out the hairspray, long, even strokes, then looks up and tosses her head to watch which way her hair falls, what it looks like after it does. She dabs perfume onto her fingertips, applies it to all the places any woman at makeup counter would advise, then bends her head and slowly reaches for the flame of black hair between her legs and dabs it too. The woman's breasts are large, but, Francesca noticed, sighing, cumbersome, asymmetrical, the bosom of a pleasant girl in a painting of a half-harvested field, or like Ma's, the last person on earth Francesca wanted to be thinking about now. The woman takes a deep breath, deeper now. Her breasts rise, assuming shapes somewhat more like the ones in those magazines. Almost imperceptibly, she reddens. She grabs an obviously expensive silk negligee from atop her scuff brown purse and holds it in front of her by a delicate ribbonry of its shoulder straps. She juts one hip, then the other. She frowns. The negligee is undeniably beautiful, but somehow all wrong for this woman at this moment. She holds it at arm's length and lets go. It falls, a pool of fabric atop her neat pile of clothes. She stands naked, breathing not so much deeply now as heavily. Naked, nude, but nothing like a painting. A real woman, young and scared, shaved and powdered, covered with goosebumps and shivering despite the tiny beads of sweat on her brow and under her breast, her chest covered with a faint, splotchy blush. The woman shakes her head and chucklously silent, then smiles in a way she must hope is wicked, or at least brave. She opens the door. She faces the doorway. Okay, she says. Is that me? Francesca thought. That chirpy girl's voice? Close your eyes. She crosses her arms over her breasts, hugging herself, closes her own eyes, and emerges into uncertainty, the inevitability of the next room. They planned their stops miles in advance, looking for filling stations where they wouldn't have to wait for an attendant. They cut down on stops. They drank as little as possible. They ate nothing but the sandwiches, fruits, and little strufoli cookies from the picnic basket that Nonna had sent, even though Francesca warned Billy he'd be sorry he was eating even that much. They were each supposed to sleep as much as possible while the other drove, and Francesca did try. But between the replaying of those 4 hours in the Sand Dollar Inn and the bracing speed at which Billy drove that T-Bird, trying to make up for those 4 hours, blowing past tractor trailers and decent families motoring unhurriedly along in their dull Chryslers, not to mention Billy's habit of turning up the radio all the way whenever he found a rhythm and blues song or a song off that amazing new Johnny Fontaine long player. The best she could do was close her eyes. A state trooper pulled them over. Billy showed the man his license, registration, and another piece of paper, mumbling something about courtesy. Moments later, they were back on the road, unsighted, going just as fast. His father's massive donations to the Fraternal Order of Police paying off once more. My get out of jail free card, Billy said. He blushed. What an upside down world, Francesca thought. The Carolina pines rushing by her window in a liquid blur. Billy, this older boy she'd once hated herself for being stupid enough to believe she might have, this big man on campus, this rich boy, reduced before her eyes to a boyfriend, her excellent boyfriend, eager to please, calling in favors on her behalf, crazy about her. It all started the day her sister left. That was the same day Francesca met Billy, but Billy's falling in love with her, as much as he meant to her now, was a lucky byproduct. Growing up, Kathy had always been the smart twin. Francesca was the pretty one, or at least the one more interested in being pretty, the girly one. Kathy was the bohemian who loved wild jazz music and sneaked cigarettes. Francesca was the good Catholic girl. Francesca was a cheerleader and an attendant on the homecoming court. Francesca did her homework, or pretended to, in a mouth shop. Francesca owned not one but two poodle skirts. But without Kathy around, Francesca unconsciously filled up the empty part of her where her sister had been by somehow becoming Kathy. At the time, she told herself that all the clothes shopping she'd done for the first few weeks of the term was for her roommate, Susie's, benefit. Something they could do together and the means of getting Susie to stop wearing that terrible little girl jumpers and dresses she'd shown up with. Only after she'd done it did Francesca notice she'd remade her wardrobe into khakis, blacks and reds, turtlenecks and slacks. Likewise, Francesca couldn't remember making a decision to start smoking, her sister's brand, no less, but open her purse and that's what was there. The smoking was probably a consequence of the studying. She never made a conscious decision to study more, but for no reason she understood. Suddenly in class she was one of the smart kids. Her judiciously raised hand sought by her beleaguered professors when they wanted to move things along. Which came first, the chicken of how good it felt in class to be one of those kids, or the egg of long nights bent over her desk, smoke curling in the languorous haze of her study lamp? Several times she'd seen Billy Van Arsdale in the library studying next to a girl, or coming out of a movie theater with a different girl, out of one of the bars on Tennessee Street with a different girl yet. Sometimes Francesca, too, would be on a date, freshman, no one special, or in a study group. Always Billy would nod hello. Often he would make eye contact. Occasionally he'd even pause and exchange pleasantries. She despised him for mocking her like this. She was cool toward him but polite, afraid that if she tried to ignore him or, worse, told him off, he'd embarrass her even more. She had not for a moment believed she was deploying Kathy's favorite tactic, indeed her only tactic, in getting boys to like her. Francesca might never have known that was exactly what she was doing, however inadvertently, if it hadn't been for Susie, who was in glee club with Billy's heavy-set little brother George. One day, studying for midterms, Susie told Francesca that if she wasn't careful, her playing hard to get act was going to make it so that Billy Van Arsdale never worked up the courage to ask her out. Playing hard to get? Ridiculous. Francesca was too nice, too eager to please, lacking the nerve it took to try to get what she wanted by rebuffing it. Francesca told Susie she was out of her mind, but Susie cited George, who cited a conversation he'd had with his brother about whether he had any classes with this girl, Francesca Corleone. Why do you ask? George had asked. No reason, Billy had said. What, do you like her? George asked. Shut up, dickhead, Billy said. Are you in her class or not? I thought you told me to shut up, George said. You're an asshole, Billy said, and punched him in the arm and said forget it. And George said he wasn't in any classes with Francesca, but he was friends with her roommate. How do you know they said all that? Francesca had asked her, and Susie said she didn't know. So why would George lie? Francesca had thought about the way her brothers talked to each other and decided that Susie, an only child, couldn't have made something like that up. The next time Francesca ran into Billy, she did nothing more than just hold his eye contact a few beats too long. But of course that did it. Seconds later, he was asking her out. He knew this great juke joint out in the country. H-Bomb Ferguson was playing. His hit was called She's Been Gone. Had she heard it? Can't say I've had the pleasure, Francesca said, trying and failing to restrain her smile, to stop blushing. The next day, the dorm mother knocked on her door and handed Francesca a single red rose and an envelope containing an H-bomb Ferguson 45. 2 days later, they had their first date. 2 months later, here they were, racing north. Watching him now and pretending not to, she could see. Now that she'd seen all of him there was to see, now that they'd gone to bed together, and even though he'd probably been with 100 girls, he turned out to be the straight-laced one and she the curious one, pointing, asking, trying things out. Yes, it hurt some, yes, 4 times in 4 hours and had left tender enough that it now seemed slightly greedy, now that she was convinced they were in every adult way in love that Billy Van Arsdale was not what she had thought he was that first day of school. He was a little short, with hound dog eyes and a crooked smile that she thought was cute, but certainly wouldn't make it in the movies. His blond hair was also disheveled. He had the wardrobe of a small town southern lawyer, brogans, seersucker, and linen suits, pocket watch on a fob. It had belonged to his great uncle, who'd been chief of the Florida Supreme Court. Tailored Egyptian cotton shirts rendered unpretentious by their frayed cuffs, and somehow only moments after he got dressed, no matter what he was wearing, his clothes were shot through with wrinkles. He was a frankly awful dancer and seemed unaware of it. He sang along loudly to songs he barely knew. He laughed through his teeth like a cartoon character. His parents hated each other and had neglected him and his brother. The beloved Negro woman who raised him had killed herself after her grown son was murdered in Mississippi by the Ku Klux Klan, and Billy had been the one who found her, crumpled on the bathroom floor with a cabinet full of pills in her stomach. He went to a psychiatrist once a week and spoke of it as if it were nothing to be ashamed of. All of which is to say that it was not his undeniable good looks, his multitude of talents, or his perfect storybook life that had gotten him all those other girls and the student body president as well. He was a born politician, one part the Van Arsdale name and what that meant in Florida, one part his own exquisite manners and social nature, and a third part that was hard to define. More than charisma, Francesca thought, just shy of magnetism. Except for a stretch of Virginia. Billy drove the whole way. Francesca did eventually get some sleep too, before she felt Billy's hand on her shoulder and awoke, disoriented, to the harsh glare of winter light off fallen snow. She sat up and rubbed her eyes. Billy was obviously proud of his accomplishment, of providing this miraculous view for her. She wasn't sure she'd ever seen the city from the Jersey side before. It was a stunning view, but nothing about it looked like home. Pretty. Aren't you excited? He said. Are you okay? You sleepy? Have you been driving in snow before? What time is it? Yes, no, often. On ski vacation, right on schedule. They'd made up all 4 hours. I love you, she said, leaning over to kiss his stubby cheek. Name's Junior Johnson, ma'am, he said, affecting a southern drawl. At your service. Who's Junior Johnson? A race car driver who'd first developed his skills evading federal agents during bootlegging days. She'd never heard of Junior Johnson? A distant cousin, it turned out, of Billy's mother. Ah, said Francesca. So that's where the Van Arsdale fortune originated. Billy started to say something and stopped himself. It's okay, she said. Get it out of your system now. No need, he said. You sure? They'd discussed it before. She told him that her father had rebelled against all that he was a legitimate businessman. His import-export company was called the Brothers Corleone, but only out of respect for his father's wishes. He'd been the only brother involved. Because this isn't discussed, okay? Anything you want to ask about all that, you ask it right now. But whatever you do, don't embarrass me in front of my family. He turned toward her, his mouth open. I don't believe you think I would. I don't, she said. You wouldn't. We're just tired. I'm sorry. Just drive. Christmas Eve, yet still the morning traffic was awful. By the time they made it to Long Beach, they'd lost one of the hours they'd regained. Two squatty men in long overcoats came out of the stone gatehouse at the entrance to the semicircle mall of houses her family owned. Billy rolled down the windows. Francesca could smell the food cooking from inside her grandmother's house, a good 50 yards away. She leaned over Billy's lap so guards could see her. One of the men called her Kathy and said he was sorry. He hadn't recognized the car. Hadn't recognized her at first either, without her glasses. Glasses? I'm Francesca, actually, she said. The man nodded. We were told Silver Hawk, not Thunderbird. Your ma don't know cars too well, I guess. Better get a move on. She's been calling down here for hours. The outside of her grandparents' house, the smallest and least ostentatious on the half-circle mall, all eight of them owned by her family, was entirely undecorated. Her grandmother was still in mourning. With no lights or wreaths, the house seemed smaller, diminished. Across the street, the bungalow where she and her family once lived stood dark and empty. Someone had built a snowman in the front yard and hung a wreath the size of a truck tire on the door. Before Billy could even turn into the driveway, Francesca's family started pouring out of her grandmother's house, led, of all people, by her twin sister, the languid bohemian one, wearing big black eyeglasses and bounding across the snowy lawn like, yes, a cheerleader. Hungry? Francesca asked Billy. Starving, Billy said. Pace yourself, Francesca said, but not too much, or they'll think you don't like 'em. She opened her door, blasted first by the shock of the cold. How could they ever have lived here, in this icebox? And then by Kathy, whose embrace slammed her against the side of the car. They jumped up and down and squealed, none of which had been Kathy's style for years, though at Thanksgiving their reunion had been similar. Only when they separated to look at each other and Francesca felt the cold wind on her face did she realize she'd been crying. You got glasses, Francesca said. You're pregnant, Kathy said, then stepped back as the rest of the family descended. Francesca, stunned, was enveloped in their hugs and kisses. Kathy rocked on her heels, smiling, and gave a little innocent seeming wave, though the glasses made her expression hard to read. Francesca knew a person could get pregnant the first time, and she knew that what Billy had done wasn't safe, pulling out of her, grabbing her hand and clutching it over him. But it was hardly a dangerous time of the month, and anyway, twins or not, how could Kathy know? Billy hoisted a huge mesh bag of Van Arsdale oranges on one shoulder, grapefruit on the other. The tree's where? Billy said. What tree? Kathy said. She scooped up Mary, Aunt Kay's adorable little girl, holding her against her hip like somebody's mom. What tree? Mary parroted. The Christmas tree, Billy said. To put the presents under. We're Italian, Billy boy, she said. There is no Christmas tree. We Italian, boy, Mary shouted. At least this was the Kathy of old. For God's sake, Francesca said. We have a Christmas tree at home. Grandma doesn't have a Christmas tree, is all. Put it by the Presepe. Her grandmother clucked at the for God's sake. Billy cocked his head. What do you call it? Francesca said. A nativity sense, I guess. She stopped herself and looked at Kathy, who understood the unspoken question and nodded. Yes, the Presepe was holy enough to be in keeping with Grandma Carmela's mourning. In the living room, you'll see it. Francesca's mother arched an eyebrow, raised her left arm, looked at her wristwatch. The snow, Francesca said. It slowed us down. All the way it snowed? Her mother said. From DC on, Francesca said, just guessing. She'd been asleep. No, you made real good time, blurted a bald guy, who introduced himself as Ed Federici, friend of your auntie's. Kathy had mentioned him in a letter. He and Aunt Connie were engaged, even though her annulment hadn't come through yet. I'd say, with that much snow? Stan Jablonski agreed. Don't mind her, he said, winking at Sandra, which Francesca always found creepy. She's been up since dawn, your ma, looking out the curtains for you. The two fiancés loaded themselves up with the rest of the packages and on the way inside began interrogating Billy about the routes he'd taken, the bridges, the shortcuts, the gas mileage. How is it possible, a family Christmas, and those two outsiders were the only other men? Stan, who'd been engaged to her mother for 3 years with no date set, and the accountant who did her family taxes, engaged to a woman who was still married? The manliest of them all, Francesca's father, Santino, was dead. Her grandfather, always the laughing, dotting epicenter of any family gathering, was dead too. Uncle Mike wasn't coming. He was in either Cuba or Sicily on business. She'd heard both. Maybe it was both. But for Christmas? Grandpa Vito must be rolling over in his grave. The Hagans had moved to Las Vegas and weren't coming either. Uncle Fredo was supposed to have been here yesterday, but apparently had called and said he might not make it at all. Uncle Carlo had apparently disappeared from the face of the earth. Just the two sorry fiancés, and Billy, her Billy. Francesca watched him go, eager to save him from an afternoon of cards, televised football, and endlessly proffered snacks, suddenly weak in the knees with desire for him. Had that ever happened back in Jacksonville? But she was pulled away from him, powerless against the tide of women who swept her, as if in a dream, into her grandmother's hot, pungent kitchen, a fortress of enduring love that time had somehow never touched. Clouds of steam, a mist of flour, tubs of boiling oil, counters spread with sheets of dough, waxed paper covered with slabs of fresh, seasoned fish, that hulking white stove, a museum piece that would probably outlive them all. In the next room, the spindle of the record player was crammed with the same Christmas 45s that had been wafting into this kitchen for Francesca's whole life. Caruso, Lanza, Fontaine, you name it. Children ran in and out, always underfoot, nibbling sweet scraps. Aunt Kay stood at the sink, washing dishes until it came time to make the handful of things she knew how to make. Her mother, Sandra, sturdy and earthy, and Aunt Connie, shrill and bitter, had never liked each other, but in this kitchen they anticipated one another's moves and needs as if they were Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Angelina, her grandmother's pillar-mitten aunt, who must have been 100 years old now and still without a word of English, sat in the corner behind a card table, assembling ingredients that came her way. And then, of course, Grandma Carmela oversaw everything, barking out instructions, stepping in to execute the most tricky tasks, all with an abiding love always felt but never stated. Kathy pointed to a pyramid of milky white eggplant, then handed Francesca a chef's knife and a freshly uncapped bottle of black cherry Brookdale soda, chilled in a snowbank outside. One look at the bottle. They couldn't get it in Florida, of course, and Francesca broke into tears again. Where had the tough girl gone? Where was the part of her that had been Kathy? Ah, the sweet tears of joy, her grandmother said in Italian. She raised her chipped coffee mug, the same one she'd used for as long as Francesca could remember, its faded image of the Hawaiian Islands now crusted on the outside with the remnants of a dozen doughs and batters. For a proper cena di Natale, this is the ingredient most crucial of all. Who could help but be moved by this affirmation from the lips of a woman widowed less than a year? Each of the other women scrambled to find her own cup, mug, or bottle and raise it high. Against the nape of her neck, Francesca felt Kathy's face, the temple of those eyeglasses. You're just a big sap, Kathy whispered, and together, identically, the twins laughed. At Mass, Francesca had to keep whispering instructions to Billy, who'd never set foot in a Catholic church before. He was as endearingly clumsy with the kneeling and the crossing as he was on the dance floor. But she could feel Kathy's eyes on Billy, even if Billy couldn't. She could hear Kathy saying that this was just the kind of thing that's lovable now and makes you crazy later. Even if Kathy, seated at the far end of the pew, studying poor Zia Angelina, uttered nothing but hymn and litany. When the church bell tolled for repentance, Francesca made a fist and struck her breast softly 4 times, one for each hour in the Sand Dollar Inn. At the altar rail, she did it again, one for each time they'd made love. Walking back to the pew, she kept her eyes down, penitent, away from Billy's. But once she kneeled and finished her prayer, she sat back and took his hand. Only then did she realize that Aunt Kate, next to her, still on her knees, her lips moving in silent prayer, had taken communion too. She converted, Kathy said on the ride home. I figured that, but after all these years, Francesca said. For the kids, I guess. They were in Billy's T-bird. Kathy raised an eyebrow. Even with the glasses, she bore a disconcerting resemblance to their mother. Per l'anima mortale di suo marito, for her husband's mortal soul. Her husband's mortal soul, Francesca frowned at her sister. She goes every day, Kathy said, just like Grandma, and for the same reason. Everybody goes for the same reason. Francesca still hadn't been able to pull her sister aside and ask what she'd meant when she'd said, You're pregnant. More or less. Kathy's eyes widened, exasperated. Despite or more likely because of the heavy absences felt by nearly everyone around the table, the Corleone family's traditional Christmas Eve feast of the 7 fishes was loud and raucous as ever. The wine flowed freely, the women making up for what, in the years past, would have been drunk men. During the early courses, the children's Christmas letters, expressing their plain-spoken love for their parents, were read one by one, youngest to oldest. The poignant and disturbing notes receded as the writers got older, but every letter was received with strident good cheer, culminating in the letter from Aunt Connie. It was the first time in more than 30 years that Carmela Corleone had received only one declaration of filial love, a delicate moment that Connie, to the astonishment of more than a few, lightened with a letter so hilarious that it was still being passed around courses later. Likewise, all hearts were warmed by the story of Vito Corleone's lone intrusion into the romantic lives of their children, the blind date he'd arranged many years ago before for Connie, soon after she'd begun dating Carlo Rizzi, with a nice boy who'd just graduated from college with a business degree. Ed Federici's lively, self-deprecating version of the disastrous date inspired Mama Corleone to slip a champagne toast to the happy fidanzati in between courses. And what courses they were! Crab legs and shrimp cocktail, fried bacala and stuffed calamari, steamed clams in a marinara sauce over fresh angel hair pasta, and finally, at least until the break before dessert, flounder stuffed with spinach, sun-dried tomatoes, mozzarella cheese, and several secret ingredients Zia Angelina had inserted when no one was watching. The risk of a heart attack, said Ed Federici, palms on the table, dazed as a man looking at an empty space where his stolen car used to be. Triples in the first hour after a heavy meal. Stan had given up halfway through the last course and was asleep in the next room, bathed in the flickering glow of an unwatched football game. Only 2 people were still eating. Frankie, forking it in like a champ, and Billy, who was poking at his flounder like a man who'd found gold and was trying to recall why it was so valuable. Connie shushed Ed and slapped him on the top of his florid, prematurely bald head. Mama hears that, she'll be the one who has the heart attack. She'd been drinking wine at the same pace all day and had just opened a new bottle of Marsala. Her slap, theoretically playful, was loud enough to those watching it flinched. Several people in the other room struck their head around the corner to investigate. The slap had immediately left a hand-shaped mark. Francesca led Billy from the table, taking him into her grandfather's old office just as Aunt Kay finished folding up the kids' table. You get enough to eat, Billy? Kay asked. Yes, ma'am. He sat down heavily on the leather couch against the wall. Save room for dessert, Kay said, smirking. Hey, either of you seen Anthony? He's outside, I think, Billy said, with Chip and a bunch of the Clemenza kids. They were the children of the kids Francesca used to play with when she was at Chip's age. Now those playmates had families of their own and lived in the houses down the street. They were alone now. You did good, baby. They like you, I can tell. Why you grinning like that? He asked, lying across the couch, clutching his stomach. She knelt on the floor beside him. No such thing as a free lunch, she whispered. So pay up, Buster. Kiss me. He obeyed. It lingered, not the sort of kiss Francesca had meant to have in this house. When she opened her eyes, the lights were flashing off and on. Don't make me dump cold water on you, Kathy said. Come on, dishes. March, I'll wash, you dry. Billy lay back, the same sated look on his face he'd had in the hotel, and finger waved. The women had of course been doing dishes all day. Francesca was looking at 10 minutes worth of plates, knives, stemware, serving bowls, and baby bottles. A jazz station played on a small console radio Kathy had found somewhere. On a creaking wooden chair in the corner, Zia Angelina snored. The twins were otherwise alone together. Where's Grandma? Francesca asked. Mass, she and Aunt Kay just left. Twice? You're kidding me. Go look, car's gone. Kathy bent her head toward Angelina. Thank God she snores, Kathy said. Otherwise we'd have to be checking her all the time to see if she was dead. Don't look at me like that. She's deaf on top of her no English. How much you want to bet she can understand more than she lets on? Oh, you mean like B-boy? What are you talking about? You think everyone else is so blind. I don't think everyone is so anything. But you're the blind one. That snotty little good old boy in there, asleep in Grandpa's office. That's some nerve, don't you think? Can't you see he's just using you? Using me, Francesca said. What are you, back in high school? I took him in there. What are you, the slut princess of Tallahassee? Her glasses were half fogged from the steam from the tap, but she kept them on. You've lost your mind. It's sad, actually. I feel sorry for you. Francesca held up a fish-shaped porcelain platter and arched her eyebrows. No idea, Kathy said. Just stack it with that stuff under the phone there. Can't you see Billy's just here to experience a genuine mafia Christmas? To him, we're a bunch of dirty guineas. Something for him to laugh about over highballs at the yacht club with Skip and Miffy. The year he saw real Dago gangsters with Tommy guns in their violin cases. Anthony Corleone had brought his violin all the way from Nevada just to play Silent Night for them. Not well, but it was sweet. I'm not going to dignify that with a reply. Kathy clanked a wineglass against the faucet, and it shattered. She didn't even curse. She was cut. It bled like mad at first, but was really nothing. They cleaned it up, together, without saying a word. Francesca got her a bandage. Kathy heaved a sigh, met her sister's eyes, and said something in a voice so small Francesca had to ask her to repeat it. I said, Kathy said, that is all true. What's all true? Kathy rinsed the scum from the sink and told Francesca to get her coat. They walked to the farthest corner of the yard, concealed behind a floodlight, and Kathy, an old joke they'd each done dozens of times, lit two cigarettes at once, in the manner of a Hollywood tough guy leading man, and handed one to her sister. You and Billy? That was probably the first kiss anyone had ever had in that room that didn't lead directly to. She looked up into the snow, as if the right word might land on her. To what? Kathy stood with her hand on her hip and blew a stream of smoke away from the light. Do you know how long it takes to have someone declared legally dead? Do you know how long it takes to get an annulment from the church? A couple of months, I guess. You guessed wrong, little sister. Kathy was 4 minutes older. Longer. That's how it started. When Aunt Connie had announced her engagement and set the date for December, Kathy had been as shocked as everyone else. She'd presumed that Connie was pregnant, but a chance discovery in Connie's bathroom ruled that out. Kathy, being Kathy, had gone to the library and made some phone calls. It takes a full year before the state declares a person legally dead, and it's complicated. Most annulments, even for a woman abandoned, take just as long. Oh, come on, Francis. Is that all? A donation to some judge's campaign fund, another to the Knights of Columbus, and everything gets sped up. It's just the way of the world. Kathy shook her head. She looked away from her sister, into the darkness. You don't get it. She's not getting an annulment. It's a lie. She doesn't need one. They lied to us. They hushed it up. Uncle Carlo didn't disappear. He was murdered. Who's they? Uncle Mike and everyone he controls. You're retarded, Francesca said. There was never even a funeral for Uncle Carlo. There's a death certificate on file, Kathy said. I went to the courthouse and found it. I bet the New York phone book has a dozen people named Carlo Rizzi. Kathy stood in the darkness, smoking, shaking her head. The human eye is utterly passive, she said, obviously, quoting some professor or textbook. Only the brain can see. What's that supposed to mean? Kathy didn't answer. She finished her cigarette, lit two more, and started again. One Sunday, she'd met Aunt Connie in the city for lunch at the Waldorf. Connie showed up drunk, with a man who wasn't Ed Federici, kissed the man goodbye, took her seat, and when Kathy confronted her by asking how it was going with the annulment, Connie blurted it out. Carlo didn't disappear, she said. Mike killed him. Connie held up her hand and told Kathy not to speak. She was drunk, but her voice was steady. Mike killed him, Connie said, or had him killed, because Carlo killed your father. Carlo killed Sonny. Francesca burst out laughing. Kathy's eyes looked lifeless. Connie said that Carlo beat her up, knowing that Pop would come to her rescue. When she called him, Pop did just that, or tried to. Men with machine guns killed him when he was stopped at the toll booth on the Jones Beach Causeway. And Connie was out of her mind, Francesca said. And so are you if you believe that. Just listen up, Kathy said. Okay? Francesca didn't answer. Pop's bodyguard were on the scene right after he was killed, and they took his body to an undertaker who owed a favor to Grandpa Vito. Nothing about it ever got into the newspapers. Some cops took bribes to write the whole thing up as an accident. Pops didn't have bodyguards. No one, she was going to say, killed Pop but couldn't. Kathy tossed away her cigarette butt. Come on, you don't remember the bodyguards? I know what you're thinking about, but those guys were from his company, importers. Kathy bit her lower lip. Do you honestly think I joke about this? I don't think you're joking. I just think you're wrong. This is hard, Kathy said. Just hear me out. Francesca, frowning, gave her an after you gesture. All right, Kathy said. So then Aunt Connie says that the men who, well, the men at the toll booth, those men, it turns out, were working for the same men who paid Uncle Carlo to beat her. She was crying her eyes out at this point, and if you'd seen it, believe me, you'd have believed her. Her own husband took money to beat her, and he did it. And the reason he did it was so that those men could kill her brother, Kathy hissed. So they could kill Pop. Stop it! And she stayed with him for another 7 years. She fucked him for another. That's enough! 7 years, and she had babies with that monster. But it's so much bigger than even that. Connie says that the same men who did all that are also the ones who shot Grandpa Vito, and they're the same people who killed Uncle Mike's wife. First of all, Francesca, Aunt Kay's not, again, the hand. Not Kay, Kathy said. The other one. Apollonia, his first wife in Sicily, about whom Kay knows nothing, but was blown to kingdom come with a car bomb. Apollonia? Francesca thought. Car bomb? Kathy had enough imagination to invent things that wild, but Aunt Connie certainly didn't. If Connie had really said that, she'd either fallen for someone else's lie or was telling the truth. Kathy kept talking faster, the stories Connie told piling onto the things Kathy had been able to confirm later. Moment by moment, Kathy's voice sounded colder. She might have talked for 5 minutes or 5 hours. Francesca had no idea. Francesca couldn't stand there anymore and couldn't move. She concentrated on the popping of the firecrackers in the front yard, the sounds of the children's laughter. Later, she noticed that those sounds were gone, but she hadn't heard them stop. For a while, she concentrated on how it felt to have snow melting in her hair. She tried to look at her sister and also past her, to the wintertime remnants of her grandfather's beloved garden, where he died, happy, at peace. And that's why Aunt Kay became Catholic and why she goes to Mass every day and sometimes twice. They're on their knees trying to pray their evil murdering husbands' souls out of hell, just like Ma ought to do for. And then, just like that, Francesca was looking down at her sister, crumpled in the snow, bleeding again, this time from her nose. Her cigarette was still in her mouth. Her glasses had flown off her face and landed a few feet away. Francesca's right hand was still balled into a fist, and it hurt. Kathy stirred. Lunatic, she muttered. A tide of rage roared in Francesca's ears. She kicked Kathy in the ribs. It wasn't a direct hit, but it was enough to make Kathy grunt in pain. Francesca turned and ran. Francesca lay on her side on the edge of a double bed, in a darkened room that had once belonged to Uncle Fredo, who lived here with his parents until he was 30. He'd been in Las Vegas for 10 years, but the decor, dark drapes in wood paneling, a faded map of Sicily, and a fly fishing painting that looked like it came from Sears, seemed unaltered, as if Grandma Carmela expected him to move back in any day. After what might have been hours or minutes, Francesca heard someone in the bathroom across the hall, banging and running water in a rhythm that was unmistakably Kathy's. Francesca heard Kathy's footsteps, heard her get into the other side of the bed. She did not have to look to know that Kathy was facing the other wall, lying on her side, a mirror image of Francesca except for the pajamas. Francesca wore nightgowns. What are you talking about? When we first got here? When you ran to the car like you were actually glad to see me? Again, anyone else might have thought Kathy had fallen asleep. Oh, she finally said. That. Don't you remember? When we dropped you off at school, the last thing you said to me was to not wreck my eyes reading. I said don't get pregnant. You got here, and the first thing you do, with your remarkable grasp of the self-evident, is tell me I have glasses. So other way around. You said don't get pregnant, and I said don't wreck your eyes. I stand corrected. So are you? No, Francesca finally said. Of course not. You haven't at all? Why, have you? No, Kathy said. So quickly, Francesca figured the answer was yes. They did not talk about what had happened behind the floodlights, the stories, or the punch, or even the fate of Kathy's eyeglasses. They stayed on opposite hips on opposite sides of the bed. They stayed awake long enough to hear their grandmother downstairs, beginning to fry sausage, which meant that it was probably about 4:30. Eventually, they did fall asleep. Eventually, as sleeping people will, they moved. Inexorably, each was drawn toward the center of the bed. They entwined their arms and legs. Their long hair seemed blended together. They even breathed as one, each exhaling on the neck of the other. Oh, honey, Francesca whispered in the darkness, presuming her sister was asleep. I can't believe what I did to you. Maybe I am you, Kathy murmured, and they, as one, went back to sleep. Francesca awoke to the piercing shrieks of children and the murmurs of hurting adults. She sat up. Snow was falling. Downstairs, The pitch of the din grew higher. Over it all rose Grandma Carmela's deep call of Buona tele! Someone had arrived. Francesca hurried down the narrow back stairs. The kitchen was full of food but empty. She heard two sets of feet coming her way and stopped so she wouldn't get smacked in the face with the kitchen door. The door flew open. Kathy and Billy were both showered and dressed, grinning like they just caught Santa Claus red-handed and commandeered the sleigh. Billy was decked out in a red blazer, a green tie, and a shirt so white it put snow to shame. Unfrayed cuffs, the white of divinity fudge. You'll never guess who just drove up with your uncle, Billy said. Which uncle? They smoothed her ruddy hair. She hadn't even brushed her teeth. Which one do you think? Kathy said. Mike. They both came to get me because they were competing to tell me this news. Oh, please, Kathy rolled her eyes. Uncle Fredo! She wasn't wearing the glasses. She had a black eye, but not much of one. A person would have to be looking for. Come on, guess, Billy said. I give up, Francesca. Santa Claus. Weirder, Kathy said. Who's weirder than Santa Claus? Deanna Dunn, Billy said. Francesca rolled her eyes. On their last date, they'd gone to see that Deanna Dunn picture where she has a deaf baby and her husband dies at the end fighting the Great Chicago Fire. Just tell me. I'm serious as a judge. He held up his hand, ready to be sworn in. Even at 22, dressed in a red blazer on Christmas morning, Billy was easy to picture as a judge. He's not kidding, Kathy said. It's Deanna Dunn. Cross my heart. Which she actually did. I'd actually heard a rumor that she and Uncle Fredo were dating, but I didn't. Just then the kitchen door swung open, and trailing in Grandma Carmela's wake came Uncle Fredo and Deanna Dunn. In person, Deanna Dunn's head seemed gigantic. She was very tall and more beautiful than pretty. On her left hand was a diamond ring as proportionately absurd as her head. Miss Dunn, Francesca said. What'd I tell you? Kathy said, even though it had been Billy who told her. Kathy liked foreign movies. Deanna Dunn was someone she made fun of, but the way Kathy was looking at her now, she could have been the secretary of the Deanna Dunn fan club. Please, darling, call me Deanna. Her accent was neither American nor British, and in person sounded remarkably unlike human speech. She took Francesca's hand. Deanna Dunn. So magnetic, Francesca felt dizzy. Yesterday in Jacksonville had only in the most indirect way unleashed last night's exchange with Kathy. It had nothing to do with the surreal sight of Deanna Dunn in this old, familiar kitchen. Francesca's life had been seized by dream and nightmare logic. The rich boy Francesca loved calmly served black coffee to a two-time Oscar-winning actress. Francesca's grandmother sang a Christmas carol, not a hymn, but one about Santa Claus. Francesca's dead father had been both a murderer and murdered. Uncle Fredo slouched against the doorframe, staring at his shoes. He looked like he'd eaten some bad clams. Behind him, as if someone had given a signal, came an explosion of flashbulbs. Francesca expected to see men with visors and big cameras jostling for position, shooting them as if from the edge of the red carpet. Fredo didn't even look up. From the next room, over shouted thank yous and the shredding of gift wraps, came the voice of her mother, the voice that had been lying to Francesca all her life. If you don't hurry up, Sandra called, you're going to miss Christmas. Christmas! Cried Deanna Dunn, hurrying past Uncle Fredo. Deanna Dunn was not tall. She'd only come off that standing next to Uncle Fredo, who was short, and because she had a tall woman's walk and also a colossal head, the eye is passive. Only the brain can see. How marvelous!